However, there are even more problems that are coming to light that SIG is currently dealing with as well, not just with the P320, but also the XM7 rifle as well. I'm sure a number of you are already familiar with the report that has been going around. However, they're also facing a lawsuit over the XM7 rifle in general. From Defense News, here we have this article talking about how True Velocity and its sister company Lone Star Future Weapons are suing SIG-Sauer, alleging stolen company trade secrets. Now, I have looked at some of the information from this particular lawsuit and some of the claims that are being made. It is a little bit interesting, the claims of IP rights and intellectual property being stolen by SIG through the mechanism of aggressively recruiting GDOTS employees who had spent years designing and developing these technologies and obtaining crucial and highly confidential design data. Now, the problem with this that I see inherently is that when it comes to a non-compete agreement specifically for employees in these very technical fields, where it might be next to impossible for an employee to find a gainful employment if they are let go in the same field that they're already experienced in, if they stay with this non-compete agreement that they've already signed, a lot of courts more and more are having a hard time backing up these particular non-compete agreements. And I think while there are other claims, this particular claim of using the former employees to steal intellectual property rights from True Velocity is probably going to be one of the more difficult claims to uphold, simply because it's kind of cruxed on these non-compete agreements, and SIG-Sauer is saying, hey, we hired these people after you either fired them or demoted them. So this is yet another case that we're going to have to keep an eye on and see how it plays out for SIG-Sauer. Now, it's not just lawsuits that SIG-Sauer is seeing the XM7 rifle have difficulties with. As I mentioned previously, there is also the report that has come out, and I first actually saw this report from Daniel Waters, who is a historian who was actually mentioned and cited in the report for his work on the history of the 5.56 and the AR-15's development timeline. Now, if we look at the report itself, there were a number of different places here that I kind of wanted to point out and note as we go through here. I think this is probably the core argument here. The XM7 rifle reflects a philosophy favoring long-range, large-caliber, semi-automatic rifles to enable engagements beyond 500 meters. Known as gravel bellies, believers of this school of thought evaluate weapon performance on static rifle ranges without consideration for the combat conditions a rifleman is expected to perform in. Evidence of the failure of this concept can be found in the M14, America's shortest serving service rifle. The heavy, large-caliber M14 was quickly replaced with the small-caliber, lightweight M16. Disturbingly, the XM7 shares a great deal of characteristics with the ill-fated M14 design. And personally, as someone who has taken a look at a fair amount of the information surrounding the development of the 5.56 cartridge and its ultimate purpose and role within a warfighting capabilities, I have to agree on this fundamental premise that the XM7 is just the next version of the M14. And while it may make a very good designated marksman's rifle or squad sniper, or whatever these specific nomenclature is being used, I think that it is not a appropriate replacement for the general issue rifle, at least at this time. But let's continue to go through the report and see some of the other things that have been brought up by it. Most of this beginning section we'll skip through because it's basically just one long history lesson. However, if we get to this bit here, which is a little bit more modern, this does give us the rationale and the reasoning behind the initial development of the XM7 rifle. Quote, however, combat experiences in Afghanistan created concerns about the ability of an individual squad to engage targets at distance. American troops were being engaged well outside of typical rifle range, at distances greater than 500 meters. The small, high-velocity 5.56 ammunition was having limited effect at that distance. Medium machine guns like the 7.62 NATO, M240, specialized snipers, indirect and guided munitions were able to close this gap in lethality. Most significantly, a specialized role was added to each squad to provide additional standoff range, the designated marksman. Officially introduced into the Army in 2002, the role of designated marksman is to engage enemy automatic rifle teams, anti-tank teams, and snipers using precision fires. End quote. Now we continue on with some other information here. However, let's see. One of the other things that is being talked about is the amount of pressure that's built up in the system. This is something that can be of great concern. Now, for the US military, who has basically a blank check, very good in general logistics, the service life of a weapon system, be it a rifle or a pistol, might not be all that important. However, there are still concerns about making sure that that service life is within acceptable ranges and can be used effectively and not have to create some sort of situation where the individual soldier is concerned that their firearm is going to break down on them during sustained or even just general use. Again, quoting from the report here, this means that to achieve greater velocity, the XM7 must also create higher pressures. Traditional brass-cased ammunition cannot be safely used in a system with such high pressures, leading to the creation of a proprietary steel-brass hybrid case. Higher peak pressures require stronger and heavier components to maintain safety and reliability. Higher peak pressures also increase the risk of parts wearing out quickly. Higher muzzle exit pressure makes the weapon louder and may require the use of a suppressor to maintain acceptable noise and blast exposure. The need to always install a suppressor negates the benefit in size, weight, and balance that a short barrel is intended to provide. And continuing on here, SAMI's report on the 6.8 hybrid ammunition states that this ammunition has a maximum average pressure of 80,000 psi. This report includes a warning: maximum average pressure levels greater than 65,000 psi may present increased risk of unsafe cartridge case or firearm rupture, thus requiring cartridge case and or firearms designs that depart from traditional practices. Now, that is very much the point of the 277 Fury's hybrid case design. However, with that said, we already do have a hybrid case design on the market that utilizes a nickel alloy two-piece design very much similar to what the 277 Fury uses from Shell Shock Technologies. The NAS3 case is very much the same style, but uses slightly different materials. In the case of the wall itself, it uses, as I said, a nickel material, an alloy, and then for the base of the case, in the case of the pistol cartridges, it uses an aluminum, and in the case of the rifle cartridges, they're using a steel base case. Now, from my limited experience with this particular case, if you will, this brass case alternative from Shell Shock, as well as talking with some others, people online who have had experience with them as well, they seem to hold up to not only the higher pressures, but also do not have need for resizing or reforming like a traditional brass case would. Now, of course, there are going to be no free lunches in terms of, materials designs and things like that. Everything is going to be some sort of a trade-off. However, I wonder if, because this particular solution already existed, that SIG had to basically copy Shell Shock's homework and come up with their own idea in order to handle the requirements. And it's not like the shell shock technology is not capable of being a drop-in replacement for the existing weapon systems that are already on the market. They already have a wide range of 9mm as well as 5.56, 308, as well as a number of other cartridges that they are currently developing or working with ammunition manufacturers directly to develop and create loadings for. And a lot of these loadings, looking around at what's available on the market, these are pretty hot and heavy loadings that are running at basically plus P plus style pressures. Essentially, you could be seeing a situation where these new cartridges could take off and become more popular with these higher pressure loadings. However, to accommodate for this, you might see changes in the build of the barrel extension, the bolt in, say, like an AR-15 style platform. Conversely, for standard like 9mm pistols, you do also have quite a bit of weight savings. If I hold a box of standard 9mm ammo next to the box of shell shock brass that I still have sitting around from when I was initially playing and testing around with these particular ammunition designs, the difference in just felt weight is substantial. So there is definitely something here, and I think this is a technology that the Army really should be looking at for a version 2 of the next generation weapons program. But hey, what do I know? Now, continuing on in the report, if we go a little bit farther, we also see some discussion of things like ergonomics, the weight of the weapon system, and things like that. Quoting again here from the report, however, the light weight of the stock and side folding mechanism mean that more felt weight is transferred to the front of the rifle in combination with the gas system. This means that the XM7 feels more front heavy. Again, this is something that the XM7 has as an inherent design problem because it is a piston system, not being a direct impingement system. It is more easily able to mount a folding style of stock. However, that also means that they are making the whole thing much more front heavy, and that is something that is noted in this particular report and continues to be noted by the troops who are actually using this thing on a regular basis. But it's not just the front heavy nature of it, it is also the overall weight as well. If we continue on here in the report, it says, quote, "The weight of the XM7 rifle is one of the most significant departures from the M4A1. The unloaded M4 weighs 6.5 pounds, while the unloaded XM7 without the suppressor is just over 8 pounds. Once the SLX suppressor is added, that goes up to almost 10 pounds, 9.84 pounds. This is a total weight increase of over 3 pounds over the M4A1. This difference is further exaggerated when the XM7's heavier ammunition, magazines, and optics are all added to the scale. A complete, unloaded XM7 rifle issued to soldiers weighs 13.26 pounds, significantly heavier than even the Vietnam-era M14. Now, moving down, it's not just the weight that is also an issue, it's also the accuracy. Previously, when some of the P320 issues were starting to come to light, the Art and War podcast had an episode dedicated specifically to the issues with the P320, as well as a report documenting a number of issues with the P320, the P365, as well as the SIG Spear, which is basically the civilian derivative of the XM7 rifle. And similar issues with accuracy were also noted in that particular report. And going back to the XM7 report here, we see that 3 to 6 MOA on evaluated XM7 rifles. Test data from a significant quantities of XM7s now in service is not yet publicly available, however. But 3 to 6 MOA is pretty bad. The baseline standard for this rifle is supposed to be no more than 4 MOA. And most civilian shooters really aren't going to be happy with a rifle in this particular price point that isn't doing 1 to 2 MOA easily out of the box. Now, moving down, we do also see more issues with potentially with the ammunition and that high pressure loading that it is using. Noting here, in all examined rifles, the wear occurred on the bottom side of the barrel in the same area. It's about 4 inches back from the crown of the barrel and just behind the gas port here. And if we scroll down further, we can also see what the bolt is starting to look like after use and wear. On the left here, we see a used bolt, and then on the right here, we see a brand new bolt. Enhanced view of the used bolt. Note the wear to the extractor. Protective coating has worn to the point that bare metal is visible, and the previous 90-degree edge has been worn to almost 45 degrees. Again, this is probably indicating that different materials and different construction need to be used in the barrel extension as well as the bolt itself to prevent these kinds of issues if we are going to be running such hot, high-pressure ammunition. There really is a give and take. Yes, we are getting more velocity, we are getting more energy and impact downrange, but we are also losing a fair amount of parts life and durability. And it's not just the barrel itself, there's also potentially issues with the SLX suppressor. As noted here, the mounting system seems to have problems with it as well, potentially leading to catastrophic damage to the suppressor, like what is shown in the image here in this report. Now, if we move on further into the report, we do also see a number of other things that came out of these military exercises that were conducted. Going back to the report here, quote, the author observed gunfighter company C-1506 during their daytime iteration of a combined arms live fire exercise, or CALFEX. The soldiers had already conducted a dry and blank iteration of the CALFEX and were well versed in battle drills needed to succeed. The platoon, the author observed, was tasked with providing suppression of the object in order to enable the maneuver of the other platoons in the company. 10 minutes after making contact with the enemy, the volume of fire of the platoon was able to output was insufficient. After 15 minutes, the platoon was almost completely out of ammunition for rifles, light machine guns, and medium machine guns. By this point, spare XM7 magazines had already been taken from soldiers not on the firing line. Platoon leadership, radio operator, medic, etc. Now, this may indicate that a change needs to be made to the basic loadout and the number of magazines that are being carried by each individual soldier. But that's also going to translate to increased weight as well being carried. So either that means they're going to be strapping even more weight to the soldiers, or kit needs to be taken out in the soldiers' basic loadout in other places. And I'm not entirely sure if that's going to be possible. Now, moving on, we do also see that there are other reasons why we have moved to small caliber, high velocity rounds like the 5.56. If we go back to the report, we actually see here a comparison between a quote-unquote light and heavy weapon system. Time to first shot, time to follow-up shot, and overall hit factor have tangible impacts on the battlefield performance. These results are corroborated by similar testing done at the Weapons Training Battalion. If we look here in these tables, we see that when it comes to time to first shot, no matter either 100 or 300 range, split time, and hit factor all weigh in favor of the light 5.56 style solution. And if we go over here to hit probability, we see that only in the factors of a destroyed head or hitting the chest do we see a slight advantage go towards the heavy solution. However, given that all of the other factors outweigh in favor of the light 5.56 style solution versus the 7.62 style solution, I think it would be fair to say that for most purposes, it probably makes more sense to be defaulting to a 5.56 style cartridge. Now, if we continue on, we can also see some of the ergonomics issues that were also brought up in the report. Here we see a photo showing a soldier attempting to charge the rifle using the charging handle here at the rear. Quote, to avoid hitting the stock, soldiers must pull up and out on the charging handle to lock the bolt fully. It was also reported that pulling the charging handle up and out with too much force had the potential to break it. Other reported problems with the rifle include ambidextrous magazine release, handguard retaining mechanism, and issued sling. The author recommends a thorough investigation into the causes of these issues with the goal of improving the XM7 rifle. Now, the current existing systems, such as the M4A1, do have their own capabilities that could potentially bridge the gap between what the XM7 is trying to accomplish and what the current standard issue M4A1 is capable of doing. If we go back to the report, we see a section here talking about the Russo-Ukrainian War. Quote, specifically, the M955 armor-piercing 5.56 is preferred for the ease at which it can penetrate body armor. The use of black-tip M955 armor-piercing 5.56 ammunition does not have a significant effect on the reliability of the rifles being used. Additional open-source data on the conflict has confirmed the ineffectiveness of Russian body armor as well as the reality of infantry engagements below 300 meters. These findings are just one small data point from the war, but what is clear is that the basic principles of infantry combat have not changed. Now, if we expand this particular concern out to other near-peer potential adversaries, i.e. China, there is, at least in my understanding currently, very little reason to believe that China has significantly higher body armor capabilities than the Russian forces that are currently fighting in Ukraine. So again, we see another situation where it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to make the XM7 rifle be the standard issue rifle for all infantry. And going above and beyond just the ammunition, there are other things that have been done within the civilian market to improve the accuracy of the AR-15 pattern rifle. If we go back into the report, we see this. Special operations, notably Army Special Forces, have adopted upgraded variants of the M4A1. Variations add free-floated barrels for greater accuracy, improved gas systems for reliability, and suppressors for reduced operator signature. Advanced magnified optics and laser aiming devices increase the range at which operators can engage targets. These upgrades support the original intent of the M4A1 and the battlefield philosophy behind its use. Special Operations Forces supplemented the modified M4A1s with rifles developed for long-range aimed fires, the designated marksman rifles. Concerns about penetration of body armor at distances beyond 300 meters could be in part mitigated by the use of M955 AP 5.56 ammunition. M955 is already in DoD inventory and can be produced in greater quantities. While currently uncommon for use with rifles, further developments of tungsten core penetrators in 5.56 projectiles have the potential to further increase the terminal ballistic performance of the M4A1. And it's not just the 5.56 that tungsten is being looked at for use in a specialized role. The Norma Adler ADLER 12-gauge shell that I've actually talked about previously is using a tungsten matrix in a number 6 size shot pellet in their particular loading in order to effectively deal with and potentially engage drones at distances, I believe it was up to 50 odd meters. If you want to read the full report, I'll link to it in the description below for this video. The XM7 rifle, well, on paper does seem like a impressive step forward in terms of modern warfighting capabilities. However, once again, like with many other military programs, we see that on paper doesn't always translate to actual effectiveness in the battlefield. Therefore, I really do think that the US military does need to consider whether or not it's worth it to be investing all of this time and effort into a completely brand new rifle for everyone in the military when smaller, more incremental upgrades could be issued and give them, if not 80 to 90%, if not more, of the same effect that they are looking for out of the XM7 rifle. However, that is just my personal opinion based on what I've been able to find. I would encourage you to leave your thoughts on the XM7 rifle and the SIG-Sauer P320 in the comments section below. But let's move on to our next set of topics.